Shalom, and welcome to today's program, Black and Jewish in America, with our distinguished guests, Rabbi Sandra Lawson and Professor Samira Mehta. I am Perla Carney, Artistic Director of the Dortort Center for Creativity in the Arts at UCLA Hillel. Before I introduce our Executive Director, Rabbi Aaron Lerner, who will make the introductions, I want to take a minute to share my reasons for presenting this program. Out of 7 million Jews in the United States, 1 million are Jews of color. 1 out of 7 Jews. Think about it. Rabbi Angela Buchdahl, the spiritual leader of Central Synagogue in Manhattan, spoke eloquently about her own journey as a Jew of color during her Yom Kippur sermon on Monday. Race, she said, is the child of racism, not the father. Jewish people are not a race. We are a family. We are a peoplehood. Jews of color deserve to be seen, heard, and accepted. I hope this program inspires us to do so. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce the head of Hillel at UCLA, Executive Director, Rabbi Aaron Lerner.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you. Great to see so many friends. And Pearl, I really love that framing of family. I have people on the call who are actually part of my family, and you're all part of my extended family. So I just want to extend you a big virtual hug and send a lot of love through the airwaves. This has not been an easy time. And so as much as we can, just to really feel each other's energy and presence in this space at this time. We, like Perla, we talked about framing this program and having this program as an offering, not just for our students here at UCLA, not just for the Jews of Los Angeles, but really for the entire country. And we probably have people joining us internationally as well. And I want to start with the challenge, which is that, as I have been in these spaces over the last several years, or in conversations about racial justice in particular, there are many of us who feel like the work is largely done. And, I hear about Abraham Joshua Heschel marching with Martin Luther King, and we hold that up as, the example in our history of, having done very substantial work. And some people in those conversations, will even say about the Black community, don't they know what we've done for them? Unfortunately, our history is much more complicated than that. And I think that having a real facing of history and not relying on things that happened 50 years ago, but talking about what's happening right now in our community is essential. As an ally and community leaders, people who are on this call, I want to emphasize that this is not a Black issue. It's not an issue that the Black community needs to solve. It's a Jewish issue. And it's something that we need to be engaged in solidarity. With that in mind, at the end of the call, at the end of this, we're going to share resources with you because it's our responsibility to actually go out and do the learning. And it's our responsibility to actually take action in our communities. I want to thank our friends. I have 2 new friends, Rabbi Lawson and Professor Mehta. It's really great to have you on the call. I'm going to give you a brief introduction, and then you'll take it away. One note about the way that we're going to do questions. You can send questions via chat directly to me. I'll collate those throughout the session. There'll probably be similar themes. And at 11:45, we're going to open it up for Q&A. So go ahead and send your questions or comments directly to me, and I will send them over to Samira and to Sandra so that we can not distract them throughout the program with a very active chat. So here we go, introductions. Rabbi Sandra Lawson, it's great to have you with us. You are the Associate Chaplain for Jewish Life and Senior Jewish Educator at Hillel at Elon University, so I'm proud to call you my colleague. You were ordained from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, one of my favorites. You have a very diverse bio that people can read, but I want to point out that you've actually served in the United States Army as a military police person, which is incredible. Apparently been involved in personal training businesses and been an adjunct professor on campus. I just want to thank you for the work that you're doing right now, especially to help all of us understand how to build a more inclusive Jewish community where all are welcome and diversity is embraced. Professor Mehta, it's great to have you joining us from the University of Colorado at Boulder, where you're an assistant professor of women and gender studies, doing research that is focused on the intersection of religion, culture, and gender. You're a book writer, well-published, and it's delightful to have you both here. The program is going to be the two of you in conversation, so I invite you to go ahead and take it away. Thank you so much.
So I am so excited to be here and to get to talk to someone who has been a friend for a really long time. And Rabbi Sandra, I want to open by asking you, by sort of letting people know. So Rabbi Sandra and I met before I was a professor and before she was a rabbi, when I joined a synagogue where she was on the board. And I was not new to being a person of color. I was born in this body, but I was new to Judaism. I was in the process of converting. And one of the reasons that it's so exciting to be having this conversation is because I discovered really quickly that being a person of color as a Jew in Jewish space was really different than what I had experienced before, and in ways that I found surprising, like different than being a person of color who knew lots of Jews, and different than being a person of color in the Unitarian church that I grew up in. And Rabbi Sandra was the person who sort of helped me figure out and tease out what that meant. And so in the same way that you oriented me to my new reality, I'm wondering sort of if you could explain a little bit about that experience to the people joining us today.
Yeah, and first of all, it's really good to be here. Thank you guys for letting me have a conversation with my friend. This is pretty cool. It really is great to be in the virtual space with Samira again. Samira and I, as she said, come from the same synagogue, a synagogue in Atlanta. The rabbi is Joshua Lesser. It's Congregation Beit Hamarim. And Samira reminded me of something yesterday when we met. You know, I wasn't a rabbi. She wasn't a professor. And I was on my way to try to be a professor. And she might have been on her way to be a rabbi. And we just switched. She found out the rabbi life was not for her. And I found out the academic life wasn't for me. So that's it's just really cool. And yeah, one of the things that I learned from my time at Congregation Beit Hamarim, which is a gay-founded synagogue, a synagogue that was designed from the very beginning. Part of its values was to welcome all, because it was founded by like 25 gay and lesbian Jews in 1985. Who weren't welcomed. This was the height of the beginning of the AIDS crisis, and many people were very afraid of Jews. So this was not of Jews, of gay people, and since this is sort of part of their DNA, over the years, they were one of the first synagogues and communities to welcome interfaith couples. One of the first synagogues in Atlanta to open its doors to Jews of color, or at least to have for Jews of color to feel comfortable. And this has a lot to do with how I view my rabbinate today. I want to, Sukkot is almost here. Let's spread over us a sukkah, a shelter of peace, and I want to create a sukkah that's large enough for the entire Jewish world to enter.
So I want to, I have a note from Rabbi Aaron reminding us that we promised that we would start by talking a little bit about terms. And so when we say Jew of color, that's sort of anyone who isn't white, right? So Rabbi Sandra and I are both Jews of color. This panel specifically is about Black Jewish experience. So in addition to being a Jew of color, Rabbi Sandra is a Black Jew. I am a Jew of color. In addition to being a Jew of color, I am an Asian Jew, a South Asian Jew specifically. And so think of Jew of color as the umbrella term. There are some sort of questions about, race is a constructed category, and it's constructed differently in different moments, right? So there are questions both about Eastern European Jews and whiteness and how we see that. And there are also questions about people who are, sort of Latinx and present a certain way, or any sort of permutation. But for now, think of Jew of color as the umbrella term for anyone who is Jewish and is not read as white. You can even kind of think about it in terms of we just all finished filling out the census forms, right? You can kind of think of it in those terms. And so coming from this particularly welcome community, what are the things that struck you or that strike you as being a person of color, and maybe specifically also being Black in Jewish space?
So before I answer that, and I hope I remember that, I know that for many, we're all in different spaces in this, there's this like spectrum of, understanding race, deconstructing race, racism, anti-racism and all that. And we're all in different spots. And I want to encourage all of you to listen with an open heart. There might be some things that we say that don't jive with what you have been taught, or you may think that some of what we're saying is not true, but we're talking from our personal experience. So that's you have to respect that. But just try to lean into whatever uncomfortableness you may have. Part of moving through this is being uncomfortable. And if you dismiss the uncomfortableness, then you're really missing an opportunity to grow and to learn. As we all try to figure this out in this new era, and it's hard. And I just hope that you all hear that. Okay, now ask me a question again.
Okay, so the question that I asked, and I think it's so good that you gave that framework, because I think we all want to think of the religious spaces and the communal spaces that we have deliberately created to be community. Right. And so it can be really painful if people then don't experience the community that we're trying to offer in the way that we hope that they will. And so I wanted to ask you to reflect a little bit on your own personal experience, but also on the experiences perhaps that you have access to as a religious leader, of the experiences of Jews of color in general and Black Jews in particular in Jewish space, in not necessarily in specifically Jew of color space, but in sort of broadly constructed American Jewish space.
So this answer is actually would probably take longer than I have, and I want you all to stay.
Highlights, Sandra, highlights.
But like I said, I came from an amazing community that the rabbi is a dear friend of mine. I talk to him whenever I can. I just had a conversation with him the other day. And even this community that I still love still has challenges around race, like we all do. And I think that one of the things that's universal with my experience and every other Jew of color that I've ever talked to, is that I don't think the Jewish community, the larger white Jewish community, understands what racism looks like today. When we think about racism in our society, we hold up, and rightfully so, the KKK, neo-Nazi, now the Proud Boys, I've learned about them recently, and our lynching, and those are all like amazing, excellent examples of racism. But racism has evolved, and the racism I experience is different than my parents and different than my grandparents. And so how racism looks in Jewish spaces is often around this concept of around what it means to be welcoming. And so if I walk into a Jewish space, I have armor on because I know at some point during my entry into this new Jewish space, I'm going to be confronted in some way, shape, or form about my Jewish identity. I have never been in a Jewish space where my Jewish identity has not been questioned at some point. I just want to stress that. It is even where I work here right now, even though I got a big rabbi sign on me. And
just to insert, long before you were a rabbi, I've never seen you in Jewish space not wearing a kippah.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to put that out there. I can't see the back of your head right now, but
right, you're right. It's a habit that I started doing, a long time ago when I'm in Jewish space. I don't wear a kippah all the time, but when I do wear them in Jewish spaces. And so, you know, a friend of mine lives in Israel. We were talking once, and we were talking about boundaries. And so would you say to me, I'm just curious, I want to know all this stuff about you. And I say to you, I just want to go pray because I just got here, or I just want to eat my food, or I'm praying the Amidah, that's happened to me. And I'm saying to you, this is not a good time, but you're continuing to press me as to why it is a good time. That's actually not about welcoming and curiosity. That, to me, I read that as trauma. That means that you need to feel safe. There's something about my presence that makes you unsafe, makes you feel unsafe. And my friend in Israel was saying that if you want to see if someone is true to what they're saying, give them a boundary, because if you give them a boundary and they don't respect your boundary, then it's really about something else. This is someone who works on trauma. And so I wish she framed it a lot better than I just said it. And so the Jewish community, because of trauma, has a lot of concerns and fears about anyone who walks through your door. And we need a lot of work on how to be welcoming, especially to people in marginalized groups. What I'm saying is this, what I experience as a Jew of color, as a Black woman, as a Jewish Black woman, is similar to some of the experience that non-binary Jews face when they walk into Jewish spaces, and trans Jews experience. This need to know intimate details about my life when you meet me is racist. It's not about being welcoming. And I say that I've never had a Jew of color. When I've interacted with a Jew of color the very first time, I need to know intimate details about my life and how I became Jewish. This is a unique experience that white Jews and Jews of color have.
How do you think, I'm thinking about the moments in my life where the version of that I get is a question about where I'm from. I'm from New Haven, Connecticut, which is not, generally speaking, the answer that people are looking for. And the response really is, and I think that part of what's tricky is that I think that this is how many white Jews experience their questions, as curiosity, as a desire to get to know someone better. And I'm wondering, like, in the sort of tension between how the person doing the asking experiences something and how somebody being asked experiences something, do you have sort of thoughts about how you would like people to think about the power dynamic in that relationship, right? Why is it that how you perceive your intention, like if you're the asker, how would you ask people to think about that? And that's like, I'm really coming to you wearing your rabbi hat, you know, like the literal one.
Well, I'm going to still give you a Sandra answer, not necessarily a rabbi answer. And I can tell you how I respond as Rabbi Sandra, and I can tell you how I respond as Sandra. But I think that, because I'm not white, so I don't know what goes on for people. Because some of the things that people have just said to me when I because I keep a mental list, when I repeat them back to people, they just laugh because they're just, some of them are just outright ridiculous and funny. And the Jewish community has done an excellent job of presenting an image of what a Jew looks like. So when we walk into Jewish spaces, we see images on our walls that don't reflect anybody in our community. I can't tell you the number of progressive Jewish spaces I've been in, progressive spaces, where the art on the wall reflects a time gone by. So a white bearded dude with a talit, a prayer shawl, tefillin, Orthodox siddur. We have lots of artwork like that. And then people wonder why female rabbis face so much gender discrimination, and why Black people or brown people walk into synagogues and face so much racism. So we need to work on that. We need to have images in our synagogues and our Jewish spaces that actually reflect what we really look like. And we also need to tell a fuller story. This is what's playing out in our society right now. People are like, why are some people upset with Thomas Jefferson? Because we don't tell a full story of Thomas Jefferson. We only tell like Monticello and the Declaration of Independence and the President's story. We don't tell a story of how he owned slaves. He owned human beings. And people know that, but we don't really tell that full story. As Jews, we need to tell a fuller story of what American Jewry looks like. You know, that we are a tapestry of racial diversity, sexual diversity, gender diversity, and we need to hold that up. And I think that will go a long way to helping people reimagine what a Jew looks like. You know, and actually that was a mixture of Rabbi answer and Sandra answer, because sometimes if I'm just Sandra, I don't say anything. So.
Totally fair. Yeah, so where do you think a communal starting place is? I think there are sort of the interactions that you're talking about and that I'm sort of thinking about are often, they're individual interactions, right? You're like hanging out in the coat room or something, flipping through, trying to make sure you take your own jacket and not somebody else's, because like they're all navy blue. And you have that moment. And that's sort of, I think one of the things that can be tricky, right, is how communal space feels can be damaged by sort of one moment with one person. But when we talk about community, so there's like the individual work that everyone needs to do, and then there are the ways that communities carry on these conversations. And again, I'm interested in sort of thinking about, like, here is the reality. And I think there's a lot of power in telling those stories. And I'm actually wondering if you would be willing to tell one or two example stories and then how it plays out, right? Are there moments when it plays out well? Are there moments when it plays out poorly? And for people thinking like, oh my goodness, what do I do when I make a mistake like that? For religious leaders or communal leaders thinking, how do I intervene when something like that happens? Like, what does it look like when it goes well? What does it look like when it goes badly?
Yeah, so, just so I got this right, there's a lot.
Right.
Different having this conversation like with all these people watching.
So I guess what I'm saying is, so often what happens, right, is an interaction. There are things that an entire community can do that can go wrong, right? Yeah. But a lot of the time, what happens is you're in a communal space and something goes wrong with one person, right? And then either you and that one person ignore it and it changes how the space feels for the person of color, for the Jew of color, or it plays out on a larger scale. And sometimes those things go really well. And sometimes those things go really poorly. And I'm wondering if you can sort of play out an example of something going well and an example of something going poorly, and sort of how does that work, right? Like, obviously on some level, the ideal is you show up in a Jewish space and nobody ever questions the fact that you're there. You clearly know what you're doing. And like, you know, it's clearly a space that you have a reason to be in. As we fumble forward to that place, what are ways of sort of, again, what happens when it goes well and what happens when it goes poorly?
What I want to say is I think that people need to give themselves, as we learn how to be less white fragile, less white fragility, or whatever that the book is, which is a good book. One of the things I appreciate about the book is the book White Fragility is that it gives a language to talk to white people to talk about this. It's not my book to recommend, but I do recommend it for that reason. And I think Rama D'Angelo has done a really good job with that. And I think that as people learn about this, they're often afraid they're going to mess up. And so one experience I've had is that people don't say anything to me when I walk into spaces because they don't want to say the wrong thing, because they can't get that thing out of their head of how is she Jewish, how is she Jewish? I can't go say that, so what am I going to do? And then people need to figure out what that's about for them. And the other thing is that when you do mess up or you are called out, and gently called out, because I'm not a believer of like, trying to embarrass people. But if you did do something wrong, give yourself some grace, forgive yourself. The person, like if you said something to me that it was inappropriate, I guarantee you it's not the first time it's happened to me. but saying like, wow, I messed up, I'm really sorry. Or if I say I forgive you, or I say it's okay, let it go. It's, I was at a convention once where everyone there was Jewish. And we were all learning to try to be better Jewish musicians. And a guy said something inappropriate to me when I was trying to have a meal, came over specifically to ask me inappropriate questions. And when he finally figured out that what he was asking was inappropriate, after me and someone else told him that it was inappropriate, he couldn't let it go the entire weekend. He kept trying to find 50 ways to Sunday to apologize. And I kept saying to him, it's okay. Take this and learn and grow and don't do it again. We are good. And I saw him a year later, 6 months later, and he still had issues. And I was like, I don't know what's going on for you. I have moved on. You have to work this out. I'm going to give you two examples one example where it did not go well. And it's interesting because I have so many, and depending on my mood, that has a lot to do with what I pick. But in our home synagogue, and this person, so I'm not going to say his name. I wouldn't say it anyway, but
I was going to say there are like 100 people listening.
a long-standing member. I came to Judaism in the synagogue. It's my adopted tradition. I converted in or whatever. And I've been a member for a long time. I signed checks. Like I was the first vice president. Like I had authority in this community. And I was young and I didn't really realize all of that, but
you were totally in charge. You ran the High Holidays services.
That's right. I forgot about that too. Yeah. It's interesting when you relive your life with somebody who was actually there. But I was leaving to start my next adventure in life to go to rabbinical school. I took a detour along the way, but the ultimate goal was to go to rabbinical school. And this person knew me. And so it was sort of a farewell party. And what he said to me was, "You're going to rabbinical school. Wow, you're more Jewish than the Jews," quote unquote. And I was like, what? And as he said it, he realized that he had said something off. He wasn't exactly sure what it was. And this was not the first time he had made a comment like that. He's not a bad person. He just has a particular idea of, what a Jew is. But what that told me in that moment, not that he made a racist comment, but what told me in that moment that no matter what I did in this community, he never saw me as a Jew. And I've had other experiences like that with other people, but the fact that he said to me, and I didn't just convert the day before, that I'm more Jewish than the Jews. And he was trying very hard to backpedal and dig himself out of the grave that he dug, but it was just making things worse. And I've had other experiences like that where I'm still not tracked as a Jew, no matter, even in a synagogue. Capers Funay, who's a rabbi in Chicago, an amazing speaker, an amazing rabbi, Black man, he told me a story, and I think it's public too, because I think I read it also, but to hear him say it, and he's also been really gracious to me and said, if you need anything, just let me know. But he was in a synagogue, as a guest or traveling, and he had all stuff on, he had to fill in, and he had a prayer shawl, and he was saying, praying in Hebrew, and somebody said to him, wow, either you know the prayers very well, or what is or are you Jewish? Yeah, he said, they said, are you Jewish? And he said, no, I'm not. I just found all the stuff I'm wearing. And I was like, what the hell? I mean, seriously. But the one thing I'll say about an ally, and I will say her name is Shira. I don't know if you remember her, but she's a cantor, and now she's living in Canada. And we went to a Pesach service, a Passover service. This was years ago, decades ago. And, she's like, come to service with me. I was like, oh, Lord, okay. So I went, and I don't know how this worked out, but I think the rabbi knew she was a cantor, but so she was asked to go up and sing a beautiful prayer. And she sang it so lovingly. And then people knew that I was with her. So many people were coming up to me, your friend is so great, your friend is so great. I was like, thank you. So I was sort of getting like her leftovers when people were like trying to talk to her, but they couldn't talk to me. But this woman came up to me dressed to the nines, if that's still a thing, and just stuck her hand out in this sort of like stereotypical rich white lady way. I don't know how else to describe it. And doesn't say anything to me except, when did you convert? That is the only word she said to me. And I was sort of confused because everybody else was like, oh, your friend is so great. And this woman is like in this circle asking me this question, which immediately makes me feel like an outsider. Shira heard it, left all those people who were like, praising her, came over and in a sort of deconstructing kind of way, that's my sister. And like, we grew like this, what are you saying to my sister? Like, that's what, so the woman, and she really meant it like this sort of like, we were raised together. And the woman was sort of like confused. And then she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then walked off, did it without like, making the woman feel bad. But also highlighting that anybody can be Jewish. And then Shira was sort of also concerned, like I overstepped, like I laughed so hard, I'm like, that was great. And so those are like two examples that that I'm pulling from today.
So I want to sort of, I think one of the things that we've been talking about quite a bit are moments of misstep, right? And sometimes there are moments of misstep that are also perhaps deliberate gatekeeping. But I think one of the things that many liberal Jewish communities, Rabbi Aaron opened with talking about feeling like people, sort of a perception that the work is done, right? The story about Heschel. And we have another friend who talks about, who's in a mixed race family, and who talks about things, and she's a white Ashkenazi member of the mixed race family. And she talks about the things that she hears when she is not with her Black relatives, right? The things that, I'm thinking about the sort of the not latent racism, right? The not sort of systemic missteps, but actual moments of racism in Jewish community. And how in liberal spaces in space, and this is sort of, again, kind of a rabbi question, although you're welcome to answer it as Sandra. But in sort of working as a rabbi in like a Hillel community and things like that, moving communities into an anti-racist place, right? Like, so this is not necessarily your experience as a Black Jew, but rather in moving communities, and maybe ideally in moving racially diverse communities, Jewish communities, into an anti-racist place, particularly when there are lots of people who want to feel that they've already done the work and therefore are anti-racist, right? And I think I'm thinking about this, again, particularly because I know that you're a university chaplain, but you've certainly worked in congregations as well. And I think that, of course, it's also a different position, right? Like when you're doing that work as a Black Jewish woman. So not to say that your own identity isn't relevant, but that process of the liberal community reckoning with the fact that sort of having the right sort of image isn't actually enough.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is, because I do work with young people, who are amazing and challenging in all that ways that you are when you're 18 to 21 years old. And often how racism plays out is I get questions sometimes by young people. Some of my students, some are not, but they know that I have this national platform. Why don't you speak out on anti-Semitism? And I'm like, and my internal brain is, I have spent the majority of my adult life working in Jewish spaces. And also I'm thinking that you don't know what I do for anti-Semitism because you're 18, 19 years old. But it says a lot, because what Jews often don't understand is that I get racism in our Jewish space. I get it outside of our Jewish space. I get anti-Semitism in our Jewish spaces from other Jews. and I also get anti-Semitism in the larger world. So I'm getting hit, you know, from all over the place. And even on a recent Twitter thing or something, some young person or saw an anti-Semitism tweet, or don't be anti-Semitic, whatever, and said, finally you're speaking out on anti-Semitism. I'm just like, I have been dealing with anti-Semitism. So that is like one way that, like, in that person, in many people's minds, because they don't see what they don't see, that means I'm not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so, but my white colleagues, you know, may not get those same questions if they're speaking out on racial issues, you know, and so and I think that as we try to figure out how to reckon with, you know, as people say, our original sin of racism, that also means that we need to look at all the ways that our society is not equitable. We need to understand how old anti-Semitism is. You know, when Black celebrities, who I don't often know anything about until they say something anti-Semitic, and people want to know how I respond to it. And they're often sending me this stuff to sort of prove that Black people are anti-Semitic. And I said, one, yes, that's anti-Semitic. And I don't need proof that Black people are anti-Semitic any more than I need proof that white people are anti-Semitic. White and Black people, brown people are anti-Semitic because our society, Christian society, is inherently anti-Semitic in the same way that our society is sexist and racist. And sort of learning, as we learn more about that and are open to the difficulties of having that conversation, those kinds of conversations, I think that as more people, so I'm just sort of trying to figure out how to end this, but like, as more Jews interact with people of color, and more white Jews interact with people of color, and more white Jews start to understand the diversity of the Jewish people, you're going to have a lot more tension before it gets better.
So that actually perfectly dovetails with something that I wanted to ask about synagogue life. And I'm thinking about the religious community that I was living in when the Squirrel Hill shooting happened, right? And so, and I also saw this like in lots of communities online, and then lots of Jew of color communities online. There was this real sense of a need to have an uptick in security, right, at synagogues, and an understandable sense that this is not necessarily a space where we're safe. Right. And one of the responses that you then heard from Jews of color, and, you know, also from rabbis who were thinking about sort of the diversity of the congregations, was, well, how is this going to play out on the ground, right? And in fact, in the community that I was part of, one of our own teens was turned out of the synagogue while showing up for B'nai Mitzvah tutoring, because the kid showing up for tutoring was a person of color. So how the sort of inherent racism of how certain kinds of policing and security function, and the fears around anti-Semitic violence being on an uptick, how do you see sort of that conversation playing out, those potential competing needs and the implications of those fears around anti-Semitism for Jews of color in those communities, and also for people of color who are not Jewish who live in the neighborhoods of those communities?
So one of the things that when I'm asked the questions about this, because we are living in really challenging times, you know, you have white people who generally see the police as security and safety. And some Black people do too, don't get me wrong. But, you know, more Black people are aware that police don't necessarily mean safety for them. Yeah, so if I get robbed, I am going to call a police officer because I need to fill out a police report. But when I, like, for example, have a traffic accident and I know the person hit me, and this happened to me, and the woman was white, is hysterical, but as soon as the police officer comes, is all calm. I'm like, how's this going to play out? But evidence is evidence. And yeah, I had a woman, I lived in an apartment in Atlanta, private parking lot only for residents. A woman was parked in the parking lot, hit my car, tried to tell a police officer that I was parked illegally. And he's like, who lives here? And I'm like, I do. And she's like, where do you live? And she's like, I don't live here. Well, you're at fault because you're not supposed to be here. But anyway, and what I often tell many of my colleagues is that every place is different. And Jewish Jews in leadership positions, or white Jews need to be in conversation with the people of color in their community. And if you're a synagogue in the inner city, that also means you need to be in conversation with the people, your residents around you. And that also means you need to have a conversation, more importantly, with law enforcement. And I do have colleagues who have heard the cries of the people of color communities, but still security sort of trumped whatever they had to say. And now they're like, we made a mistake. We need to figure this out. So Black people, brown people in your community need to be part of your security conversation, and you need to figure out together what that's going to look like. Because what has happened is that instead of providing security, sometimes law enforcement or security guards wind up acting as gatekeepers. I've seen it, like there's a synagogue in DC that has a lot of security, and they do it well. The police officer's there just to check your bag. They say hi, hello. They don't do anything else. They don't ask you questions. They don't except for hi, whatever. But they don't try to prevent you from coming. A colleague of mine who's Black, who will be a rabbi, God willing, in about 3 years at rabbinical school, was denied entry into a synagogue that he was invited to by the rabbi because law enforcement officials acted like gatekeepers. And when he said to them, your racism is showing, they went off on him and escorted him out the door. I was at a synagogue in Atlanta, not the one I mentioned, but and I was there as the invited guest rabbi, and there were 2 armed law enforcement officers in the sanctuary, and I told the team, I said, I'm really uncomfortable with this. How is this law enforcement officer? Now, this is before Pittsburgh, I'll say that, but how is this law enforcement officer providing security if they're in the middle row of the sanctuary or the door of the sanctuary and not by the door of the synagogue? And they were surprised by my statement. And then I also said some other things about security because I do know a little bit about security. The police officer was a nice man, but I was like, I'm the rabbi. This makes me uncomfortable because I don't feel safe with this guy here who's supposed to be providing safety for everybody. So we're in a national reckoning of realizing that how our racist system treats Black and brown people. You see it played out on our screens. And we just need to have those conversations. You can't just make decisions for your entire community around safety because not everyone in your community feels safe. What we do here at Elon is every year we have that conversation. We talk with the law enforcement officials here, and I reminded our staff this year that we need to do it again because things change. And the Jews of color, I'll just say this. Before I came on this call, this is a perfect way to bring this up. A Trump rally came through our campus, on Rosh Hashanah. And now, not just any Trump rally, like whatever you have in your imagination, if you are that person about what a Trump rally looks like, that's exactly what it looked like. It was loud, Confederate flags, large Trump flags. I did not experience harassment, but I heard from faculty members who did. I heard from students who did. Jewish students had anxiety and fear. Black students on campus had anxiety and fear. And I walked, because we were doing Tashlich, the one thing that we could do in person because we could socially distance. I had to walk through the rally wearing my kippah. And I also, interesting because I also had a megaphone, not for them, but for the Tashlich. And which is, for you don't know, it's so we cast off our sins. And I was like saying to myself, don't engage, don't look, just keep walking. And I checked in with our students when I got there. And today, an organizer, who I don't know if this organizer is faculty or staff or a student, was trying to organize a protest on Friday around 4 o'clock. And the university chaplain said to the organizer, I hope you are including Jewish voices in this. University chaplain is an ally, not Jewish. And she said, I am. So I wrote her back and I said, the timing is really unfortunate because this is right at the beginning of, right before we celebrate Rosh Hashanah and Sukkot. We have 2 Jewish holidays. Please, and I said, also, I want to remind you, this caravan came through on one of our holiest days of the year. You know, and Jewish students on campus experience anxiety and fear. And I know Jewish students want to be part of the protest. You're asking our students to choose. So please reach out to me so that I can be part of the help, how to reach out to me to bring more Jewish voices in, including myself. And I want, and how I can offer support. But that's just like, for many of the society, I think there was a lot of focus on how Black students experience this. It has not been a lot of focus on how Jewish students have experienced this. And it's just sort of like tone deaf. There was some point to all this, but I already forgot it. So it had something with our question.
It's an excellent story, though. So I'm starting to get questions from the audience. There's a related question to the security question, and that is, you want to be a Hold
on, wait.
Oh, you remembered.
Yes, I do. So the law enforcement was there and did nothing. They were the Elon University Police, the city of Elon, and Burlington. Those are 3 surrounding areas. Were there and did nothing. Like what I heard was that when that they didn't know they were coming, and did not help students. Just did nothing. And so now our students, Black, brown, faculty, parents are furious. And so this is another way how not working with law enforcement is not helping our students. Okay.
So I've got a couple of questions from sort of folks who have joined us. One is a related question. So, and this again, I think gets back to synagogue life, although I think it's also true of campus life. You know, you want to be welcoming to people when they come. You want to approach new people. You in no way want to induce fear and trauma of the sort of you don't want to freak them out or traumatize them by trying to suss out what they're doing there. There are also these security concerns and fears that, while they might be misplaced in the case of any individual walking in, are not like misplaced in terms of the sort of global world climate that we're in, right? Do you have thoughts about how rabbis, community leaders, the security, you know, you gave the example of the synagogue with the folks who like, they check your bag in DC and, you know, hey, how are you? I just need to look in your bag, like you're going into a museum. Mm-hmm. It sounds like. Are there other practices that you have seen work well?
The only other practice I've seen is when I think that many synagogues just don't really know how to be welcoming. And I say that because I have walked into a number of synagogues and other community centers where, one example, I go to the door, have to hit the buzzer, some voice from beyond comes on, and then the door unlocks, and then I open the door, and then I'm looking around, and I don't know where the voice came from. So then I'm now Black woman wandering around the synagogue, looking for this voice that I heard. Finally, someone's like, "Here I am." So like that is not welcoming. So I think that we just need to have seriously guidelines on how we are to be welcoming. And my friend Josh Blesser has a set of guidelines, and he's worked with the community on how we welcome people, and the greeters at the door follow this. And they follow, and hopefully they do follow it, but it's like, you know, when someone comes in, you say hi, you introduce yourself, you show them a seat, like you have to explain this. And then this is not the time to ask people about, oh, you're Black and Jewish, how's that possible? And this is not the time to assume that that person wants to tell you these things. And this is all laid out in their breather and their guidelines. And I think that doing that will go a long way. And before these protests, I had talked to a number of white colleagues who didn't see it as their job, white rabbis, to help their community be less racist or be anti-racist. And I said, well, whose job is it then? Like, if you are the vision of the community, and if you have people coming in who don't feel welcome, they're not coming back. So like you need to, and also any job that we do, if it fits in our role and we don't know how to do it, we have to learn. Like, and the same is true for like racism. Like, if you are the rabbi of the community and you have members who are not treating other members the same because they're people of color, who else is going to educate them on that? That doesn't mean you have to do it. That means you got to find somebody. You can find somebody to do it.
You're allowed to not have it be your expertise, but you're not allowed to have it go unaddressed.
Yes, exactly.
So just sort of so that you know, some of the questions are very different from each other, so they might seem a little scattershot, and kind of taking them in the order that they're appearing. On the subject of everything that's on our screens right now, for quite a while now, sort of one of the faces of the anti-racism movement in the United States has been the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And someone is wondering about sort of the relationship between supporting Black Lives Matter and being concerned about the relationship between Black Lives Matter and BDS, and sort of how that plays out in Jewish communal life, how you might like to see it play out in Jewish life. Sort of your thoughts on that dilemma.
So my short answer, because I'm looking, if this is another, spend a lot of time trying to articulate to people, you need to let that go. Like, Black Lives Matter is a call to action. It's a chant that started after the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin. And then it really took hold after the Ferguson protest. But really, that's all it is. It is, you are saying that Black Lives Matter. The problem is that the movement for Black Lives, which was a platform, 2016-ish, was a coalition of a lot of organizations. Some of them flew under the umbrella of Black Lives Matter, but it was a coalition. And if you know anything about grassroots organizing, to build a coalition, you build a coalition around an issue, and you don't have to agree on everything. But it was a big platform. And there was a small part in that platform that, yes, was anti-Semitic. I'm not going to say it wasn't, but it was. For me as a Black woman, that does not mean that I can now say, oh, I don't support Black lives, because that means I'm not supporting myself, which is ridiculous. But for many in the Jewish community, they could not see beyond that. And they actually did not read the platform, because if they had read the entire platform, there was 99.9% of it was amazing, and there was no way to support it. And then there was no way not to support it. And then many Jewish people or Jewish organizations who actually did not support Black organizations to begin with claimed to pool support. The Jews who stayed in conversation with Black people saying, hey, let me teach you some history here, just like you taught me about racism, let me teach you about anti-Semitism. And this is wrong, this is problematic, let me tell you why. Before the new platform was created, the movement of Black Lives have removed all of that anti-Semitic language, and to the new platform doesn't contain any of it. So you can say, you can easily say without a qualifier, Black Lives Matter. If you still have a problem with that, it's racism, and you need to deal with it. You have to deal with it. Because you're telling yourself that you can't support Black lives because you're putting all Black people in the same category because one person may have been anti-Semitic. And as I said before, Black people are anti-Semitic. The same reason white people are anti-Semitic, because we are in a society that is anti-Semitic.
So 2 more questions, one question and then our closing question. Can you speak to the impact of your Juneteenth event? And if there are other types of events you would recommend for addressing race and Jewish religion?
I will say this.
So I think you should tell people what your Juneteenth event was.
So on Juneteenth is the holiday that many Black people have known about, and white people are starting to learn about it. It is the day that we call like the sort of the emancipation of slavery. So is the day that the last slaves, the Union Army moved to the state of Texas to tell slaves that they were free, even though Lincoln had written the Emancipation Proclamation about 2 years earlier. So it took 2 years for all the slaves in the United States to learn that they were free. I had a friend of mine, Ruth Magna, who's a rabbi for the Hillel, called me up and said, hey, I have this idea and I would like for you and Rabbi Izama, who's rabbi at Yale, to lead Juneteenth. I said, oh yeah, I love Izama. I could work with her anytime. She's like, great, let me call Izama and ask her to do it. And so Izama was like, yeah, great. And so we put this thing together. We didn't actually think anybody would watch it. It was like, and then it just took, because people wanted something. They wanted something to support. There was, for me personally, because there were so many technical issues and the tech wasn't working, but people stayed on. And at any given moment, there was like, I think I've heard like 35,000 people on the call, crashed everything. And I didn't like realize the impact of it until maybe the next day, because I was like, Izama and I had worked on this whole vision. Rabbis are all about visions and themes, and it didn't work how we had planned it. But the impact for the larger Jewish community was great. And to see 2 Black women leading the Kabbalat Shabbat anywhere in front of that many people. So we could say that we led Shabbat services for the largest community ever, probably, because I don't know anybody else who's led services for 35,000 people. And I think 35,000 was at the time the total number. I don't know what it is now, but that night I think it was like 7,000. I don't know, but that was just so. And now the fact that there's more Black people and people of color leading services and sort of owning leadership in the way that the larger Jewish community wouldn't allow them to do it. The internet is now creating an amazing space for that.
So the final question, and the final question is really a next steps kind of question. What kind of education can people get for themselves or figure out how to provide in their communities? What are sort of the, what kinds of work should people sort of quad Jews go out and do on questions of sort of both allyship and creating an understanding and holding a more diverse, inclusive, multiracial Jewish world? Sort of, okay, where are the next steps internally and externally?
So one, I think that, I think we joked about people who read White Fragility or read How to Be an Anti-Racist, and that's that one book, and that's it. This is an ongoing process because we have to unlearn all the crap we've been taught our entire lives. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes more than one book. Also, if you're not a reader, that's great. There's other things. There's a podcast. There's podcasts. There's stuff. And I know that UCLA Hillel has anti-racist resources. There's also Trua, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, also has an amazing resource. And what I like about that one, I helped create it, but it helps people with different learning styles. So there's essays, there's podcasts, there's videos and things like that. The other thing is that people really need to take a hard assessment of their own personal lives. So when people say things like what Aaron said a bit earlier about, don't they know what they've done for us? I challenge people who think like that to really think about how racially diverse their own personal lives are. Do you have Black people outside of your work environment that you spend time with? Do you have Black and brown friends that you would call a friend and they would call you a friend? And then you need to ask yourself, if you figure out that your life is not as diverse as you think it is, you have to ask yourself, is it important for that to change? And then once you start to meet people from different backgrounds, it opens up your mind. One of the challenges right now with cable news and how we get our news on social media, we're often only getting information from people who think just like us. And so, the more we hang out with diversity of people, the better off we be. Like I had a drink with a guy at a bar who had a Trump hat on, and this was like a few years ago. And I was sitting at the bar with him talking, and we were drinking beer. I said, "How can you talk to him?" I said, "Because I know what he's about. Like I know exactly what he thinks. Now we're just having a beer, hanging out. I'm not worried about him all of a sudden saying some racist stuff, And then we both joke how much the world would be better off if people just sat down and drink a beer. Beer's how you think. You can have tea, coffee, whatever. It's all good."
Yeah, speaking as someone who has watched you watch me drink milk, Rabbi Sandra's a vegan, and we have gone out for hot chocolate on occasion. But I want to thank UCLA Hillel for inviting me to get to talk to you. We talk a couple of times a year, but we've talked more in the past month than we have in a really long time, and it's been such a joy. So I would like to thank the folks who invited us and made that possible. I'm gonna give you a moment for a closing word and then ask you to turn it over to Perla, the artistic director of UCLA Hillel, for the closing words.
I didn't plan closing words, but I will also just say thank you, because like I said earlier, that you give me an opportunity to hang out with a really good friend, old friend that I miss being in the same space with. And I hope that there was something that all of you could take from what we said, and realize that this is a beginning, it's not an end, and also this is an opportunity. You have two women of color with diverse backgrounds, and you get to hang out and listen to us. And there are other Jews of color, and I hope you get the opportunity to also talk with him as well.
Perla.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you, Professor Mehta, as well as Sandra Lawson, Rabbi Sandra Lawson, for sharing your thoughts with us. It was very enlightening, very touching. We know that we would like to be able to honor the tapestry of diversity in our country. It's a conversation that needs to continue, and we need to do it with an open heart and hope that we can gain moments of grace for all of us. So thank you, and I'm honored that you participated.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here. We're so glad to have this vibrant learning community together. We have one more thing on the books, and then we've got to start planning again. Next Tuesday, Rabbi Chaim will be talking about the Sukkah of Exile, the Jewish secret to survival. So we hope you'll join us. But until then, thank you so much, Rabbi Sandra, Samira, and Shana Tova. We can still say it.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Yeah.